So tonight's meeting is going to start with the Board of Adjustment. So we'll have a roll call for Board of Adjustment members.
Katie Souls,
Oh, I'm not in that.
Katie Souls,
Bob, can you see?
Joy McCoy.
Andy Miller.
and is Margaret Bowles?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Okay, I'm here.
And so Margaret on Zoom. So, okay, thank you. Could you put that agenda up again? If possible. Okay, so could I have an approval of the agenda for the Board of Adjustment, please?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Hi.
I,
Any opposed? Thank you. So I'd like to have a motion to approve the consent agenda, which is the minutes from September 27th, 2023.
I so motion.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I,
Any opposed? Thank you. So we have open forum on the agenda because this is announced publicly. Anybody have anything for we will be meeting as a planning commission in a few minutes. But this is the Board of Adjustment, so. Anything on open forum? Okay, thank you. So I have a motion to,
I move to adjourn.
Second.
all in favor?
Hi.
I.
Any opposed? Thank you. How fast was that? Maybe.
Good.
Ah,
Great work.
Solid work there, Andy.
He was taking
Hey,
advantage.
Michael. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and open the planning commission meeting, regular meeting, and I'd like a roll call of planning commission members, please.
Philip Vandernail.
Joy McCoy.
Bob Ganesi. Parnell Quinn.
Katie Souls,
Andy Miller, thank you.
Margaret Bowles.
Thank you, Margaret. So I'll call for a motion to approve the agenda.
so moved.
Second.
Second from Joy McCoy, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No further discussion?
Sorry,
We don't do that in this room.
sorry,
We go faster. than
sorry, Philip, you're right. Any further discussion on approval of agenda? All right, we already had a vote. Any opposed to approval of agenda? Thank you. Okay, so call for a motion on the consent agenda.
I so motion.
Second.
Any further discussion of the consent agenda? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I,
Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, so open forum. We begin with in the planning commission. Anybody with any items? Limit your time to 3 minutes and anything for the planning commission tonight in open forum. Anybody online that wants to raise their hand? I think we've got a couple folks online. Okay,
Because they'll have a chance to talk about the subject matter as well, right?
yes,
Get-
yeah,
get them
absolutely.
right through.
Okay, so nothing in open forum. So the first agenda item is discussion and possible action. Planning Commission Resolution 2023-1001 recommending adopting a revised official zoning map. Rezones a significant area of town in the town of Fraser. So with staff report.
Alrighty, so I didn't prepare a separate presentation for this, but I got the staff report up on our screens here. So if you all remember, on September 20th, the Board of Trustees approved an ordinance which amended our land development code to remove the Riverwalk mixed use overlay and essentially create the Riverwalk standalone zone district. So that was step one in the process to, create this standalone Riverwalk district. And this is now step two and the final step. This is a rezoning zoning map amendment. So this shows our current adopted zoning map with that overlay district. And what the board would be recommending or approving tonight would be apologies. the following zoning map. Apologies for that. So essentially, again, to go back to the previous overlay with the business zone, all the same parcels just being rezoned to the new Riverwalk district. Because this is a rezone of a large area, it's a legislative process. There are these following rezoning evaluation criteria to be considered. They don't have to all be met. In this case, most are. And I think, again, the bigger picture is that the intent of the zone district is really not changing. It's just, again, we are going from that overlay zone to the standalone district. Are there any questions?
Any discussion from the board at all, or?
We kind of hammered this out the last time
Yeah,
when we,
we did. Mhm.
right, we did the overlay.
Any public input at all?
No, there wasn't. Oh, you put it in the
Yeah.
past.
I think we have one person online, right? A couple, any input online at all?
If anybody online would like to speak, if you could please raise your hand.
Digitally.
Okay,
So I actually called Andy about this because I was wondering why there was a second motion on it, or a second reason why we are going maybe approve it to the board.
Sure. So I guess to speak to the process overall, you know, a few months ago by this point, where we changed our land development code to the Riverwalk district. So that was a code amendment process to where we again got rid of the overlay district, created a standalone zoning district, as well as changed some of those standards. Like we altered the density bonus requirements a bit. So I think it's just a cleaner process to do that code amendment separately from this rezoning and zoning map amendment process. So just a little bit cleaner to do it as two separate processes, I guess.
so we recommended the code amendment to the town board.
Yes,
The town board approved that code amendment,
correct.
and now it's back to us to have a recommendation for or against the actual zoning. The actual change in the zone,
Zoning
so,
map.
yeah,
Correct.
the change in the zoning map, but it will change the previous zone, the Riverwalk district, to the Riverwalk mixed use district, right?
The Riverwalk district,
RW.
Riverwalk district. Prior to this, it was the
Riverwalk.
Riverwalk overlay,
mixed use overlay.
yes,
Yes.
okay. So good question, so.
Yeah, thank you. I thought maybe others had that question.
Change the rules and then change the zone, so
Mhm.
basically, yeah.
Absolutely.
So any further discussion at all? Entertain a motion?
Read the wrong thing.
I'll make a motion. Recommending that, we advise the board to approve this, new zoning map. So this is resolution 2023-1001.
Second,
Any further discussion?
And there was a reason why we changed it for the RMU, because that's an acronym for something else, and it was confusing. So it'll be RW with the recommendation of the planning commission to the board.
Yes,
then
yeah,
new zone.
RW.
I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
No,
Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you. It's exciting.
Yeah.
So agenda item B is presentation of possible changes to maximum height and density and land development code.
All right, yeah, I'll go ahead and get the presentation pulled up. And before I dive into it, something I want to note is that I think this and the other two agenda items can definitely be very lengthy discussions likely to continue, um, beyond this meeting. So we can feel free to table items for discussion to the future. But certainly want to hear as much as y'all's thoughts as possible. Okay. Okay, so our discussion agenda this evening on this topic. First, just going to go a brief overview of kind of the purpose of having standards around maximum height and density in our code. Show some examples of zoning regulations from nearby communities. Show some visuals of residential developments with varying unit densities to help kind of increase your visual vocabulary of what density looks like. Have some images, kind of street view images of downtown areas in comparable towns. I think this is specifically relevant to kind of the vision for the Riverwalk zone along Clayton Court. And then finally leave off with some possible avenues that we could pursue if the Planning Commission wanted to implement any sort of changes. So again, this is meant to be informational, educational, so feel free to ask me any questions and interrupt as needed. So why do we have maximum height limits? Generally it's for aesthetic purposes, right? To be compatible with other existing structures, protect views, the beautiful mountains that surround us. Another reason, not maybe relevant for us here in the town of Fraser, is also for safety. Height restrictions around airports are one example. And the way that height is measured varies based on the roof type. So this image is consistent with the definition of building height in our code, to where if you have a flat roof, you essentially just measure to that point of the flat roof. But if you have any type of pitched roof, it's measured to the midpoint.
This was kind of a surprise to me. I thought it was measured to the high point, but it is measured to the midpoint on the rake. Or...
On a pitched roof, it's measured to the midpoint.
Okay.
Per our code.
Yeah.
What if like the units we see in Winter Park now, they have a flat roof on top, but then they have an eave over the hot tub? Do you count that as the roof, or do we count the flat part as the roof?
It may be that that is not a habitable portion of the structure. I would frankly have to look into our code to see how we define that kind of appurtenances or kind of architectural features. Generally things like non-occupied architectural features are not counted, such as like a church steeple typically is an exemption from a height. But to be honest, I'd have to look to see what our code says with regards to that.
That's addressed, yeah.
Yeah.
Parnell, I think it's the highest roof. It's the highest roof line on the building.
Okay.
So like if you were to take Ski Broker, for example, has the pitched roof and then a flat right next to it. So it's based on the highest building, part of the building.
Yeah. Well, that question just came to mind because I'd seen those buildings go up, and like on the Holiday Inn, it's at 47 feet, but I don't know if that's the peak or if that's midway.
I'm betting you it's 47 is probably the peak,
Yeah.
and they're probably within the height requirements is my best guess, but we can follow up on that too.
Well, I mean, we proved it decades ago.
And just something to complement, this slide. This is a good slide by Garrett. This provides for a variety of rooftops. So, recently went to Basalt, where they had a lot of flat roof buildings. I don't know if you really want to promote a lot of flat roof buildings. This allows you to work within the height and have maybe the aesthetic and the function of a gabled roof for the snow shed purposes. So I think this works to the advantage that you have the aesthetic design options for the roof line, but you're not necessarily limited by maximum height.
It made me question about that in our code, because logistically, from an architectural standpoint, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have a flat roof or a M-shaped roof where the snow sheds in the middle. I think that's a not a great idea for up here with our.
That depends on how the wind blows.
Yeah.
Well, with membranes now and drainage, flat roofs are doable in this climate.
Okay,
So I think it's more, seems like it's more a way to encourage something other than a flat roof and not count quite so heavily against their height limitations, so. But you're right, I mean, that's what we used to think, but it's pretty amazing what they've done with roof structures now, so.
On the con
Fluctuates.
side of that, if you get too steep a pitched roof and a big snow load up there, it's liable to come sliding right off the roof down onto people below.
That's bad.
But there's,
So-
yeah,
That's
Yeah.
bad design.
So you gotta look at it both ways.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think maybe just another last thing to add is, I think in general, with a flat roof, you could probably get higher floor to ceiling heights in your floors as compared to a gabled roof, even when it's measured to the midpoint. If that makes sense.
well, you can see from this illustration, they've lost half a story. there, basically.
Exactly, yeah. So
Yeah.
you have, attic space instead, with the pitch roof, so.
And there's some of those design guidelines that Winter Park had show the ways to hide that flat roof, basically the eaves and the overhangs, the corbels up high that keep it from actually seeing that it's a flat roof from ground levels. So,
Right, yeah. There are ways to kind of shield that and
Yeah.
aesthetically make it look like a pitched roof.
so Winter Park has that in their land development code.
right, that's what we're,
About
yeah,
the,
yeah.
yeah, so I just was wondering if we,
We'll be talking about that in a little bit. So,
okay, thank
yeah.
you, Andy.
Any other discussion on maximum height? Okay. Great discussion, though. Okay, so why do we regulate density? I mean, maybe it's not as obvious, but unit density very strongly correlates to population density. The more residential units you have in a space, generally the more people you're going to have. And obviously with a higher population, there are more infrastructure needs, water, sewer, transportation, schools, parks, etc. But density shouldn't be a four-letter word. With higher densities, the cost of that infrastructure is shared amongst more people. There are economies of scale, things of that nature. So higher density certainly has its benefits. But I would argue that it has to be planned for well, right? And I think a key consideration is always transportation. I think anytime a more dense residential development is proposed, a lot of people's first concern is traffic. But increased density is really best served by a multimodal transportation system, allowing people to walk, bike, ride the bus, so they don't have to always use their car to make trips. So this figure to the right shows a couple different kind of conceptual examples of density with single family homes on their own lots versus townhomes that are built on zero lot lines, and then apartments.
I like I did the apartment to look like New York.
Well,
Open
this
space in the middle of the
yeah,
courtyard.
this wasn't my image. I borrowed it from a source online.
No, it's good.
So just a quick comparison to kind of the standards that Winter Park and Granby have. Winter Park, they allow up to 55-foot tall buildings in their destination center zone. That's the DC on this map here. It's kind of centered along Highway 40. And then also within this zone, they allow 28 units per acre for townhome type buildings, and then 32 residential units per acre for apartments. So I failed to provide in this presentation our own standards. Our maximum density is 20 units per acre in business and Riverwalk. The Riverwalk zone has the density bonus of up to 40 units per acre with affordable housing or ground floor commercial. And the maximum height is 45 in those zones. We do allow 55 feet in the Victoria Village overlay, but again, that's really just more for the Victoria Village development was the intent of that overlay district. Everywhere else, it's 45 currently.
I think Grant Park has some different heights in there as well.
Yes, that's true. So Grant Park is governed under their plan development plan, and there's some areas that are allowed up to 75 or maybe even a little bit taller.
Yep.
So yeah. But when talking about our standard zoning districts outside of Grant Park, Rendezvous, 45.
And Winter Park just upped these numbers, right?
To be honest, I'm not sure how recent these are. I know they did update their Unified Development Code somewhat recently, and this could have been increased through that effort.
And I think part of the reasoning for the Victoria Village having a height increase is because it's downset from Highway 40. And there wasn't a huge change there. We did get some feedback from Katie at Fisher's and some other people that economically, as our high cost of living increases, that I think that's partly why the town of Winter Park went to that increase themselves.
Yeah, and I'll have to check on the records. I'll ask James, but they had something about workforce housing. If you're have stuff for workforce housing, it may not count against your density on the lot. But they were talking about it. I don't know if they approved it or not.
May not.
The density doesn't count against you on building on the lot. So if you did 3 units of workforce housing, they don't count against your 32 units per acre.
Hmm.
I'm not 100%, but
Some
somebody,
density bonuses like we've got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard some talk about it. I don't know where they went.
Yeah, if they do have that, I would say that's kind of one way to structure a density bonus. So like our current density bonus in the Riverwalk district is up to 40 units per acre, but 20% of those units have to be deed restricted affordable. So if you were to subtract out those affordable units, say you have an acre parcel, so 40 units, 8 of those would have to be affordable, subtract 8 out of 40, and that's 32 market rate units per acre, which matches actually their highest density. Looking at Granby, they also allow slightly taller maximum height than we do. They allow up to 50 feet tall buildings within what's called the central business zone, which is shown in red here, kind of the core downtown area. Not really a residential kind of area of Granby, but one interesting thing about this zone is that there is not a maximum residential density. There's no cap on units per acre. But they do have some other interesting requirements. Any portion of the structure that's above 40 feet has to be set back laterally 15 feet. So that's shown by the image on the upper left there. They also have what's called a sky exposure plane. It's like a 45-degree kind of view window, if you will, measured from that 40-foot height. So the intent behind that is to, help preserve surrounding views, make sure the building facades are more articulated. So one example, I think I'm not totally sure if this development has been fully approved yet, but this is from a Granby Board of Trustees meeting packet. This Granby Market Square development kind of shows, the setback of a, rooftop patio, kind of meeting the intent of those requirements. Any questions about that? So just different tools to help regulate.
Yeah, so they basically leave the density up to satisfying all the other open space parking requirements.
Right, exactly.
Meet the height requirements, meet all the requirements and get more units in, then you can do that. So
Right.
it's one way to approach it.
Mhm.
It'll come up in the next.
Okay. So next, these are, again, just some example images that I borrowed from an online source. And I thought it would just be a good exercise to help visualize what exactly density looks like in different contexts. So this is, kind of the typical suburban low density single family development, single family dwelling units on their own lot. This is 4 units per acre. Moving on to a higher density single family, these are not attached townhomes, but they do have a small, maybe 5-foot separation between the units, if that. So denser housing, but still single family detached. This is 8 units per acre. So twice as dense as what we just saw before. Next, this is a great example of what's typically called missing middle housing. It's a range of housing types. Townhouses, typically also called single family attached dwellings. These carriage houses here typically have like a alley, garage access. These garden flat units kind of have like a shared lawn that they face, and then duplexes, which are just like a townhome, but just 2 units instead of multiple. So 2 attached units in one structure. So this development here is 15 units per acre.
Just curious, what is missing middle?
Sure, that's more of a planning term. So I think
Just because it tried to use green space in the middle and less density in the middle.
the missing middle term comes more from I think historically development in most cities and towns has steered towards things like this, low density single family, and to jump ahead, maybe things like this, denser urban apartment style. And this is kind of a good middle ground between those two that is typically less common, but more recently becoming more common in a lot of communities.
The other thing that's atypical about it is that it's mixed use, it's duplexes, townhomes, single family, all in the same area. Whereas we tend to segregate those uses between different blocks and different neighborhoods, so.
And how many units was that to the acre?
This one is 15. So again, and these are specific to what we're seeing here. I mean, certainly, you could have a townhouse development that is more dense than 15 units per acre. But this just kind of just illustrates a kind of range of different options and what that looks like. So this here is more illustrative of a very typical multifamily housing development, 3-story apartment structures, shared common spaces, surface parking lots. This is only slightly more dense than the missing middle example. This is 18 units per acre.
It's kind of surprising. It seems like that'd be a lot more units per acre there, but
Sure. And it's also a product of unit size.
Yeah.
Again, it could be a mix of 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4-bedroom units in a development like this.
back to your discussion, Parnell, I mean, this whole thing about units is real misleading, so.
Yep.
It doesn't encourage small units.
No, well, because if you can only fit 18 or whatever, you're gonna build the biggest unit you can build because it's gonna have the best rent and the best sell.
So that maybe is another reason to go to Granby's model. Satisfy all the requirements for open space and parking and then that encourages smaller units, because you're not tied to a unit number, so.
Yeah. And something else that they do it in Japan, they don't do it here, but when you do the first subdivision, the subdivision has open space in it. And then when we go to re-subdivide, we have to give more open space. So if you have a duplex, if you have, let's take Ptarmigan, all the lots in Ptarmigan were subdivided and there was open space in all the parks below. Now, if you go to subdivide one of those lots, you have to give the same open space, 30 or 40%, 35%,
Probably 35.
35% open space. You have to give that on that lot as well. So you've already given open space for the subdivision. And then if you go back in and re-subdivide the lots, you give more open space. So there's 35% or 20% for the original open space, and then 35% of each lot goes to open space. And that really starts to shrink your density density per acre.
Yeah,
I think in Grand County, we average 12 units per acre.
Most most of us are here because of the open space, so that makes sense.
Well, 75% of the county's open space. It's either federal land or water board land.
Right.
But not in the communities. Not in
And so
the
that,
area.
that's the other thing that restricts us. We've got 25 to 30% to build on. And people want their prices to be cheaper, and they, not how that works.
So it's a price per unit for real estate, basically is what we're talking about. So if the more density supposedly, the more affordability we can talk about. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Which is why we talk about the height density as well.
yeah.
Okay, the next example, this is a kind of live work townhouse example. If you see the images up top, those are actually ground floor retail commercial spaces. And it's also just, again, kind of a difference in site design. The buildings are kind of more closely spaced. There's certainly less surface parking than with the previous example here. And probably smaller unit sizes throughout the development as well. So that leads to a unit density of 34 per acre in this example.
And one of the things on the height too is if you can make a unit taller, you don't have to make them as big. It's a psychological thing. So if you have a height in a house that's 8 foot, you guys remember houses that have 7-foot ceilings or 7'6" ceilings, they feel a lot squattier. So you need space spread out. If you can make a unit taller, then you can make the footprint of each unit smaller. And people think they're in the same size unit. It's weird, but it's a mental game with your head.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Like this room seems a lot bigger because the ceiling's a lot taller.
Yeah.
Right, you go walk into that room and it feels smaller, even though it's what, half the square footage of this room? 3/4 the size of this room?
This next example is like a much smaller site, maybe more like an infill type development, but still a similar unit type, townhouses with some live work as well. I think on this bottom right corner, but again, definitely less open space, less surface parking. So this results in 44 units per acre. Moving along with just some more urban examples. This is kind of what's typically called like a 5/1. So ground floor retail commercial with 5 floors of residential apartments on top. Again, clearly a more urban context, but this is 162 units per acre. And then just another example, this again, a more urban context, and these are very small studio apartment units averaging around 430 square foot each, and 41 units with only 8 parking spaces. On a very small site, this is a little over 200 units per acre. So again, just different contexts, but I think, some of the things that maybe looking at these images, some are actually more aesthetically pleasing than others. I would argue, the high density ones are appropriate for their context and maybe more aesthetically pleasing than the kind of monotone lower density examples. So again, density is not always a bad thing, and density can be a very beneficial thing if it's accommodated for well through things like great streetscape and a pedestrian friendly environment. Again, minimizing impacts from vehicles as far as driveways, garages, and then building design goes a long way, like Parnell alluded to. Smaller units can be made to feel larger. Dense, taller buildings can be made to be more visually appealing with their facades, architectural massing, design, and things like that. So next, I just wanted to provide a few examples of, what does it look like when you're standing on a street in a maybe similar downtown to maybe what we're trying to emulate with the Riverwalk district. So 3 different examples here. This is from Basalt. In their, I think it's Willits Town Center is the name of it, relatively newer development. And you have a, 80-foot wide right of way, on-street parking, nice wide sidewalks, and generally all the buildings here are around 3 stories, probably around 45 feet tall. Here's another example from Durango. The historic hotel on the right is 4 stories, but in general, most of their downtown is 1 to 2. But this kind of gives you the visual of something a little bit taller than the example with Basalt, but their downtown Main Street is also 80 feet of right of way. So just as wide as the previous example, but a little bit taller buildings in some instances.
The top of that hotel can show you what you can do to mask a flat roof. So
Yeah.
that
Absolutely.
overhang, yeah.
That's a really cool hotel. I don't know if you've been
That
to
is
Durango,
really
but it's really cool.
So what's our right of way on 40 going through Fraser?
It's a great question. It's
I mean,
yeah.
it's wonderful to look at these pictures with 80-foot right of ways. They look great, but we're not working with them.
Well, I think US 40, I think the seat out right of way is quite wide. I can go on and measure it real
So
quick.
Bob, I like the way you think, because that's what I've been doing for the last 10 minutes is measuring right of ways.
Yeah.
So it's actually 90 feet for the right of way
You're kidding.
in downtown Fraser. At Azteca, it's actually 130 feet.
Yeah.
When you go from Azteca east. And all throughout downtown Winter Park, you are looking at 130-foot right of way all throughout downtown Winter Park, all the way to the resort. Some areas are a little bit wider. But throughout the downtown main strip of Winter Park, 130 feet. And for Granby, 90 feet. So Granby's street is actually very similar to ours.
10 feet wider.
It feels wider because they have wider sidewalks.
Okay.
But when I'm looking at
I'm sorry,
our,
you said ours was 80 or 90?
ours is 90 as well, but I think
Yeah.
that we did more narrow sidewalks, which allowed the businesses to build close, like a little bit within the right of way is what it looks
Yeah.
like.
And if you guys want to go do this, it's fun to check out how your brain works. But we all see the tall building, coastal building, right? We're like, oh my God, that's so tall. Go walk by Fisher's and walk by the building and tell me if it actually feels any shorter or taller. Because when you're walking, you visually only see 5 to 6 feet above your head. You're constantly looking down to make sure you don't trip on something, right? So the reason you notice that building's tall is because it's new. After a couple of years, you won't think about it being tall because you never look up as you're walking past it. You just walk past the building. And if you can do it, and if we can change how we do stuff to still allow the density and back things up from the sidewalk a little bit, not too far, but a little bit. And you go through Winter Park, if you take a look at what they've done, the new buildings there by the where Carver's is now. I can't think what that center's called all of a sudden.
Just putting in right now.
Well,
Brand
no,
ones?
no, on the other side, the ones that have been in, they have the shops down
Oh.
below and that.
No.
When you walk by it, it's set off the sidewalks. So it feels really open as you go by. And then if you go up the street and go to the Arrow project where they, once the fence is gone, it'll help. But currently if the fence is there, you walk around that fence, you feel really closed in, like this picture will make you feel closed in. So if you can allow the density, and this is what Coastal tried to do, is push the building back a little bit from the highway. When you're walking by, it doesn't feel so close to you. Right. And once they get their glass opened up, it won't feel as close either. But it's, I've been doing, we're walking for quite a bit. So I got used to walking by all these buildings and started noticing all these things. And I'm like, I've never noticed this before, but it's on my mind. So I'm
Actually, in my view, maybe I look up too much and not down.
Yeah.
But I have not found the Cosling building height objectionable. In fact, I think, it's at 45, isn't it?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, it's at 45, and if we had more buildings at that height, it would just kind of blend right in. If we were to go up and allow more density by raising the height,
right.
I think we begin to see more buildings that would take advantage of density by going vertical.
Yep.
And one of the things I wanted to ask tonight was, we've heard this from a couple of the developers that, and I think one of the developers from Cosling project mentioned this at the last meeting, that it actually creates a better opportunity for the developers to give you more density, more housing, and even more affordable housing if they can put another story on.
Yep.
So, and I just wondered, do we have any more feedback on that from developers? Have we been out and talked to any more developers other than the couple we heard from?
Well, there's a couple people,
Yeah, and
Greg's in here, and then
Yeah.
Lee's. got his
Lee's
hand up.
online. I think maybe if we get through this presentation and then open up for
Okay.
questions and discussion, but I think it's a good point. I mean, it's definitely possible that kind of our density to height ratio is maybe a little off. Because I think that 45-foot height really kind of caps you at 3 stories. You can fit 4, but then you've got lower floor to ceiling heights, and so anyways, I can let the developer speak to that when we get to that.
Yeah.
So one other example though that I thought was pretty relevant for, again, the Clayton Court kind of Riverwalk vision is actually Park City, Utah's downtown. Again, similar to Durango, generally 1, 2, and 3 stories, but if you see in this image here, you've got 4-story buildings on the left, and this section of their downtown Main Street is 40 to 50 feet of right of way. So fairly narrow street. I believe our right of way for Clayton Court is 60 feet. But fairly similar. And this kind of helps visualize, okay, what do 4 stories actually look like on that kind of narrow right of way? But again, only buildings of that height in some stretches of their downtown. Most of it looks like this. 1 to 2 story buildings, and the right of way actually goes a little bit wider in other parts. So
Well, on this picture, the varying heights of the building make the skyline more attractive because you're seeing different stuff instead of just a flat.
It's a lot more interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there we go. There's the word I was looking for.
A lot more interesting.
the other interesting thing about Park City is that their block width is fairly similar to the width between Clayton Court and the Fraser River, to give you an idea. So just in closing, I mean, we'll have more discussion, but there's a lot of different options that, this commission and the Board of Trustees could pursue to change, our current standards. Ranging from really just broad-based changes, like just increasing the current standards in our existing zones, like business, high-density multifamily, and Riverwalk. We could create a brand new zone district with higher height and density standards. One thing that I personally think would be kind of a good option and maybe kind of compromise is, our density bonus standards within the Riverwalk district. Maybe making that broader and letting folks who are zoned business and maybe even high density multifamily also be eligible for a density bonus with the provision of affordable housing, or other, goals that the commission and board would like to see. Similar to that, another option would be to kind of expand the purpose or intent of the current Victoria Village overlay zone. That could be more of a broader affordable housing overlay that property owners could rezone into potentially. We'll discuss, our variance criteria after this, but again, we could change those criteria. It's just another item in our land development code. We could make that more lenient to when someone has a variance request for greater density or a taller building, maybe be more flexible in how we evaluate that request. And then tangentially kind of to everything else is changing the definition of a dwelling unit and a family in our code. That kind of affects, how many people can live in a unit by code. So like, for example, Town of Winter Park says a family is defined as up to 8 unrelated people. Granby is up to 6. Yeah, I know. But it's not something that's currently defined in our code. It's just, I think a family is just a group of people sharing a common household. So kind of establishing a number of unrelated people, it's maybe a little bit difficult to enforce, but it can help with maybe concerns of overcrowding in units. So yeah, so I'll just close with that.
Like all the cheering for density here and for heights and trying to get more real estate in town, but it faces us some pretty tough decisions. We've got to come up with a better funded bus system that runs more often and better routes. We've got to come up with ways to get people to this community without their cars. All of this is, parking is going to drive a lot of this, transportation, tied up streets, but all of this depends on us. It was really nice to see a lot of air coverage or coverage on the public radio for steamboats working pretty hard on trying to get their rail line activated to be a commuter rail.
Yep.
And several of those stories talked about that commuter rail going to Denver, which is through us. And we share Route County's gift of having every community in this county except for Grand Lake served by the rail.
Right.
And Bob Fanch has talked about in the past the self-propelled rail cars, and the Europeans now are building hydrogen-powered self-propelled rail cars that are on the rails already in Europe. So we have a gift of a railroad here that's not given to many people.
We're so far behind on rail design, what other
Yeah.
countries are doing.
Oh, yeah,
It's crazy, isn't it?
yeah. But it rails here though.
Yeah,
We're
no, right.
not talking billions of dollars to put in a high-speed rail up
Yep.
I-70.
Yep.
It's right here, it's in town, and it serves all of our communities. So if we want to introduce all this density and all these people, which they're coming anyway, and we want to make it affordable and livable, but it won't be livable if we don't improve our transportation system.
Andy, they had on the news last night, they had a featured story about Steamboat and trying to get the rail line,
Yeah,
on up to Steamboat through the Yampa Valley.
yeah,
And the first thing they're doing is they're trying to fund a study. So best case scenario is it's going to be 4+ years before you'll ever see rail to Steamboat. We need something before 4+ years.
well,
So
but Bob.
I
Bob,
agree.
Bob,
I agree with
buses-
you
well, the bus
100%.
system is right there.
Bob,
So
how long ago was 2020?
Well, yeah, I agree with you that we need to work on the rail too, but I think the buses, we can get them here, which we can, if we can get the ski train to run a more frequent schedule, we can get them here now. So the bus system allows them to come, stay, move around
without their car.
without their car.
Exactly.
So
And-
I think that's a good thing.
And Silverthorne is actually now allocating parking spaces for rideshare cars. And this is being done, of course, in big scale in Europe too. You don't own a car, you own a share in a car.
Yeah, in Denver, they have a thing called an I unit, and it's 40 units and there's 4 cars, and it's all shared cars.
Yeah,
And it's for when you have to go to a hospital emergency or you go for a big shopping expenditure.
yeah,
And there's 4 different types of cars. One's a pickup truck and one's a little sedan,
yeah,
right? So it arranges so people don't have to have a car, and
yeah.
I'll have to find the unit. It looked really cool. I saw the diagram for it. I never actually saw it built.
Hmm.
But it looked like a great idea.
Transportation is key to this.
It seems to me like the development is happening a lot quicker than the planning can. And so I wonder if we do need to have maybe a regular workshop each month, because we've talked about clarifying what a unit is for a few meetings. And we're going to do the rounds about it until we clarify what a unit is. And then we can clarify what transportation needs to be addressed. It's the development is happening quicker than we can address it. So I just a thought. I know we probably don't all need another thing to do, but there's some catch up to be had.
Well, and you can ask Philip, I've been saying this for 8 years now. The planning commission should be called the reactionary committee instead of the planning commission.
Yeah.
So I'm with you on that, Joy. We should have regular meetings and think through and plan things. Somebody asked me today, what's the chances of somebody living here their whole life? I said, well, if you take 100 ski bums, 2 might stay for a lifetime. right? That's the real number. 2 people out of everybody that comes up here to be a skate bum stays here for life. I got stuck here. I mean, by choice, but I got stuck here. I couldn't figure out anywhere else better to live.
Me either.
All right?
You were never a ski bum.
I've never ski bum. Never a ski bum. I was kidnapped and brought up here by my dad.
Well, just to Joy's point, I think that's kind of the intent behind this discussion as well as the next ones on our agenda is to do more of this proactive planning and trying to think through issues before they maybe become too big of a problem. But I mean, to Andy's point, I think certainly, maybe having more transportation options in place before allowing some of the higher density, higher building height is definitely a good point. The town only has so much agency to implement things like, passenger rail on, Amtrak, but certainly working with CDOT and other partners. But I think where the town does have a lot of agency is with, sidewalks and trails and those things like that. I mean, there's already a lot of great trails in this community connecting Fraser to Winter Park, especially and to the public lands beyond, but improving those. And I think that's going to be a big focus of the comprehensive plan over the next year, identifying a strategy to actually implement those kind of lower impact, non-motorized transportation options in our community. But
So some of the trade-offs, I think about, like at our last board meeting, we were talking about water
Mm.
and the lack thereof. Right now, we just barely have enough to meet our current obligations.
Right.
We don't have enough water to add a lot of additional density. It may well come, but that's a trade-off. And I think that the higher, the 55 is appropriate in some areas, but people come to the mountains, get away from the cities. They don't come here to find a small city in the mountains and that look of a city. You know how I think all of us was, once you get through town, you hit the open space, everybody goes, ah. Unfortunately, we do have a lot of public lands and some of the open space that surrounds us. But the aesthetic of 55 feet right in the heart of town, and even consistently down and on a river walk, there'll be so much shade, it'll feel city, it won't. And when we originally, and I know I understand the costs and the importance of density for making it more affordable to build, possibly more affordable to live in, depending on our regulations. But
Probably gonna profit
originally it was
margins.
just a great little design, low building, but that was back in the day when it was construction was easier and land was more available. But thinking about Winter Park, they're narrower. Their community has even tighter confines than Fraser does in terms of the looks of it. So they went up. I think that's a big part of it. We want to keep a separate identity for Fraser. If we go up 55, just like they did, all on the highway, we're going to look just like Winter Park. We won't have that unique Fraser, funky Fraser, whatever we want to call it here.
Yeah.
So to me, it's more of a, there may well be specific areas that it's appropriate. You say that are tucked away, and in all of these, and you look at the old documents, they all say protecting views. Well, if you don't own the property, it's hard to protect the views, but there is a difference between 45 and 55. Now, Greg, when you were talking about the cost on Main building or street, that you had to go 8 feet on your residential. May I ask Greg a question?
Sure.
Okay, so on that, was it because you had the commercial on the ground level and you needed that extra headroom.
So
So Greg, just give us your name and address, please.
I'm Greg Beckler. I live in Meadow Ridge.
Thank you. Thanks,
Um,
Greg.
And so after Garrett's presentation, actually, we were told the top point of our building, so the top eve of those slope sections was our height limit,
Yeah.
which we had to have to then shed snow to the middle. So I could have gone 9 feet on 3 stories above, since it's measured from the middle of that slope, because we had to drop 2 feet to get that top point,
Oh,
which is unfortunate, but whatever, they're built.
okay.
But
You would have been okay with budget ceilings with our prayer.
if we did flats, yeah, or well, I guess, yeah, we have to have some flat section, but yeah. And. Yeah. You want me to talk?
I do like the thought with Granby of the maximum height corresponding to a change in the setback. And I really like your point about the maximum height, because that's what a variance would do, is take into consideration the unique circumstances of the property being developed.
Well, and I know we have another part of this presentation, the circumstances for variance are so restrictive that most people can't get the variance. And instead of saying, oh, it's an architectural thing or a density bump, or we're trying to do something different, they just, I think we've approved one in the 20 years I've been here, we've had a variance that actually went through.
Well, that's why we're talking about code amendments.
Yeah, right.
So it's more predictable. So
And I know you're concerned about the height because you're thinking, oh, everything's gonna be 55 feet. Well, not everybody's gonna build 55 feet, and we can put mechanisms in there that if you do want the 55 feet, you have to give us, well, some things that we want, like 20% workforce housing, right? At least
Yeah.
market rate workforce housing. But it's people that live here year round, right?
So, to Katie's point, I also like the Granby model where they went to a higher 50 feet, but they have this
Kickback.
kickback so that you got that 45-degree, plane that helps you to see the building not as one great big tall structure, but it's like got a setback there. I think we could live with 55 feet and adopt that 45-degree plane, setback on the floors that, face our main street.
what's the name of the large building there by Cooper Creek to the south where the police station is?
Snowman's?
Snowblaze.
No,
Snowblaze?
well, next to.
Winter
Snowblaze.
Park Station.
Crestview?
Well,
Winter
there's
Park
a large
Station.
commercial building there where the police station is. What's that?
Winter
Winter Park
Park
Station.
Station.
So when you shovel that roof, that building is stepped back like we're talking about. When you shovel the upper roof, you have to touch that snow 5 times to get it to the ground.
Yep.
I mean, that's one issue with this step back. It's really tough for snow removal. I mean, it's a great, this really helps with the height issue, but we've got to somehow consider how they can remove snow from the building. So.
Yeah, well, with the rooftop decks that they've done in Rome, and I don't think we have any in Fraser yet, do we? They have, the decks actually heat up and melt the snow off
Right.
the deck.
They're both
They turn it
interviewed.
on to help melt it. Yeah.
So, but it's
Well, I mean,
necessary, yeah.
You can hook it up through a heated water solar system type thing that glycol, I guess.
Yeah, well, what Aspen does is they require that for solar offsets if you're gonna heat outside, but yeah, it's a tough one, so.
No, right.
Yeah,
It seems like there are a couple of options of either changing the maximum height or creating less restriction on variance. But yeah, some
I
things
like
to
I
consider.
like this code amendment better, though. This is where,
Yeah.
we're not faced with somebody with I don't know, we're trying to make it more predictable for everybody.
Right.
It's tough for Clark because he wanted to have some assurance before he designed buildings that he could get this height. But through this type of process, everybody knows what the rules are, so.
Right, and
Okay.
if we plan for the transportation being different,
Mhm.
saying, okay, we're looking at different stuff. If we wait till the transportation comes in, we may have everything already built and there's no worry if it's too late, right?
Yeah.
Because if we don't go into a major recession or World War III, we should see a blip for about 1.5 to 2 years, and then we're gonna be right back into a boom of development, because there's not enough housing.
Yeah.
I mean, everywhere there's not enough housing. Or affordable. And it's not only, it's affordable to us and everybody else too. I mean, the workers that are coming in to start up here at 18 to 25. They're getting paid what, $15 to $25 an hour now, so they can't go to a LIHTC project, but it's too expensive to live in a unit, so there's 9 and 12 strangers living in a house together because they just meet roommates and move in. Or, some of the guys that just lost their jobs, they're moving in with their friends because they can't pay the rent anymore.
Hmm.
Because people are laying people off, the construction industry is laying people off. But this is why it's nice to have a discussion now and start moving forward with this.
Sure.
I like building it into our code, so everyone follows the same
Right.
path.
We do have Lee with his hand up. We're doing public comment yet.
Yes, could we move on to some public comment? Sure. Greg?
I'm Greg Beckler. I live in Meadow Ridge. Thanks for all the time you guys take to do this. I would not want to plan for 10, 15 years out. I have a hard enough time planning for 1, 2 years out per project. So thank you for dedicating the time and the thought and the energy towards it. I just kind of wanted to touch on some things you guys talked about today. I think for the density limit, Granby's model to me makes a lot of sense because the 40 units per acre, the 60 units per acre that we got with our density bonus had nothing to do with how dense we could build our project at Coastal. It was all about building height, parking, and open space. So that's just one kind of note. I don't think really putting a number to it, as long as it's high enough, it doesn't matter. So I think there's a lot of cool things that can be done with some micro units and stuff that people younger than me, probably younger than all of us, really like. And that's one thing too. We've leased up now all but 3 units in Coastal. And something that was a big concern when we were planning the project was parking and the parking requirements of the zoning code not actually being enough for the people when they come there. And so for our residential parking requirement, what we did is we said every unit gets 1 parking space, whether it's a 1, 2, or 3 bedroom, and then we charged for any additional spaces. And we will have 5, maybe 6 spaces on our residential requirement that are not going to be spoken for with residents. So there's a lot of people who are attracted by the bus route, or they're living with 1 car, what have you, or figuring out offsite parking if they didn't want to pay. I don't know what they're doing, but there is a demographic that's not me or you guys probably that is willing to work within that and live in this town without a car. So I thought that was interesting.
Before you move up.
Yep.
How much are you charging for?
So we'd say 100 and I tell people we'll do 75 a month for an extra space. So, yeah, no, it's not, I mean, I would pay 200 to have my car, right outside my door.
Your mic's off to the side.
You don't even hear what you're saying.
Yeah, well, in case it's 100, in case anyone's listening. No, but yeah, we've been flexible, but yeah, there's just not been a huge demand for it. But then the other thing you guys talked about, roof slopes with the new engineering, I would have never thought to slope our roof to the middle. That was driven by our engineers to say, if we can shed to the middle, we don't have to worry about it sloping off and sloughing off onto the sidewalks because we're surrounded by 8-foot sidewalks. So we have all heating elements within the roof, heated. Now all the plumbing's coming within the building, so it can actually be liquid when it comes out, rather than just sitting up there. And then the other thing, just about going back to leasing Coastal, we had those 2 deed restricted units. And as a developer, the rent that we can charge there is fine. I don't need to charge more rent, but we had 7 or 8 people who were just over that limit, who are coming to be cops, coming to be nurses, coming to be teachers, or already here doing those things. None of them qualified. And it's just a real kick in the pants to tell someone you're $2,000 over. You can't move up here to be the new cop at Winter Park. You can't be here. They don't like their living situation. I do think there's a way to make workforce housing that bonus or what, just I don't need to charge more than 120% AMI or 100% AMI to make it work. But there's so many people that make more than that, that work here that can't sniff buying something up here or don't want to live in something that's not well taken care of. There are other options, a rental by a private owner that's not going to be professionally managed. They don't want to live there. We talking to people today, they've had a kitchen floor that's been gone for 2 months. And so they're living in our, like, there's a big demand. When you walk at Rudy's, the Rudy strip, I went to eat lunch there today. Every single door had a help wanted sign. Every single door had a help wanted sign. The Winter Park jobs board for the resort, there's 50 unfilled pages of unfilled jobs. And we got tons of inbound requests for those 1-bedroom units that no one qualified for. But we could build those 1-bedroom units, those studio units that are so attractive for people moving up here and still charge a low rent if we had some flexibility on income. So that was just one thing I would point to, since that whole kind of deed restriction topic came up.
So-
20%.
We're at 80%. So I wanted to go to 120 since it changed, but it's time and place of when we got approved.
Yeah.
So we're at 80%.
So Greg, can I interrupt you for just a second? Michael, can we change those parameters as a town, or does that have to be done at the state level?
So I talked to legal about this. We looked at the code. It's when his plat was approved based on the density bonus for that higher density, it was per that agreement. So it was a time and place approach for that. So we did verify that.
And it's no,
So if
from my-
we could change that if there was a town, right? Change that agreement.
If there was a
It just seems
criteria
like-
for first responders, I just say it because I was at a meeting today that was filled with first responders, and every agency, every care provider is short-staffed. And so if there's something we could do there in changing the partnership deed restriction to include first responders, it would help our community.
I can talk to legal as far as what that, what our options are for that. If
I-
that's the desire of the planning commission, or the board.
Yeah. And that's part of the reason we talked about changing the way, the dialogue, that we use. Instead of saying affordable, we say workforce. Because affordable has a tone to it that LIHTC is affordable housing. That's low income that Clark's doing on his project on Mills. They haven't built anything below, I think there's 3 units below 30% AMI that's been built.
We can't afford to live here. They're all working 3 jobs.
Well, but
Over here,
our wages are higher here because they need to be to afford to live here, and that's blowing us out of the water on all these
Yeah.
agreements. So I don't know, we got to be able to do something about it at the government level, I would think, but
And if you did the AMI for just Winter Park and Red Dirt Hill to the basically pass,
right,
our AMI jumps up to 75,000 instead of 53.
right. Anyway, we'll
Weird.
see what we can do with this, Greg. This is great information. So,
So
but
that would be a
frustrating.
question too. Hopefully, extrapolate those numbers and come up with an average AMI for our district, for our.
That's what I'm
housing
saying. Yeah,
estimate,
exactly.
And use that as basis.
Yeah, good question.
Trustee Souls, are you gonna use your microphone?
Sorry. So I don't know. what the
You're
rest of
pointing
you heard,
somebody at the
but
screen,
I
you're pointing
believe,
right back at you.
I believe that, if we could do that, that might help solve that.
Sure.
Because we already have our district defined for our housing authority. And if we could establish the AMI for that district and use that as the basis, that could help solve a bunch of problems.
Well, I understand this is common across the ski towns on the western slope. So,
Yeah.
So there is information in the latest housing needs assessment study that broke out Fraser individually, along with Winter Park and Granby, that spoke to the AMIs needed here in the valley. And that was just completed last year. So I know that Rob with the Housing Partnership is looking at how he can take that information and keep it up to date, kind of every year type of thing. So that we have that information available as far as what are relevant AMIs in the area.
How did that compare to the state's number? For AMI? Okay, sorry. We can find out further.
anyway, let's look into that.
Okay.
Seriously, yeah. Go ahead, Greg. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say too, like, on the, I know the goal is to have it be for people who don't make as much as can't afford. Putting an income cap on it, that's up to you guys. I think there's a concern from people that developers will get a density bonus and you know, say, oh, I'll only charge this month and then bring all my buddies up for ski houses. And I know you do have to protect yourself against that. But there's such a demand that I could fill anything that I could build for the price I built those at, and I can continue to build projects that are workforce at the same price that we built those deed restricted 1-bedrooms at, and I would love to do that. So anything that you guys come up with or want to come up with, I would totally support. I just think having it be for people working up here, you know, first responders, anyone working, like call them out. There's plenty of them looking. I would love to see it transition to that from just a flat income cap, no questions asked, because it's kind of black and white now and it's a shame. And then the last thing was just on the funky part and losing the funkiness by going to 55 feet. I do agree 55 feet, I would never want to see that right on the river. I think, you know, there's the river setback, other protections you can put in place, but I do think going to that 55 feet allows someone like me to build to 40 units per acre and not have it be just a box. I can build it similar to how we built Kosalig, closer to that density.
And that's 4 stories.
4 stories, yeah, but separated light lines coming into every unit, not a center corridor box. Which is what we want to keep building. But you know, the way the code is now, we're building townhomes for our next year or two, just because that's what we've been pushed to do by the code. But if there's some opportunity to do a lot of workforce stuff, that's our part of our mission. That's what we want to keep doing. That's what we're doing in Denver with our new projects. So I'd love to do more of that up here and plan to. So I think it's cool that this is happening. I think it's kind of happening after that variance meeting, which got a lot of people thinking. But again, thank you guys for thinking about it and planning for it. So,
With your townhomes, I heard concerns about, if the voters agreed and we purchase, your lot and you purchase our lot,
mhm.
about a 4-story townhomes going in there.
I wouldn't do that. Just the price point we're trying to hit. I don't think those people want to be walking 4 stories. We're doing 2-car ground floor garages, bedroom space or something, and foyer space on the first floor, big living, and then double master above. I think once you get into like, you got to think about if you're going for a for sale spec product, like what our townhomes would be, you have to think about who's the buyer. Do you want someone walking up 4 stories? So yeah,
Okay, I thought
I-
I'd ask you so that.
I got some good things about that land swap. I got some things about that land swap I want to communicate with people, because I don't think it's as bad as everyone thinks, but
Well, I know across the street where I live, 2 or 3 of the owners over there want to go to maximum height. They want to go 55 feet if they can.
Sure, I'll bet you they do.
Well, it's the only way they can get the units in there. Even at 45 feet, they can get the units they want.
Well, but it's,
Okay. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Any other public input?
Please got his hand there.
Lee, I'm gonna unmute you.
Mute. All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Fabulous. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm kind of new here. I've met some of you. So just to briefly
I'm
introduce
sorry,
myself-
Lee, could you just give us your name, please, and where you live?
For sure. Yeah, Lee Touchfarber. And I'm currently a resident of Denver to be moving up to Fraser in the next few weeks.
Thank you, Lee.
Of course, yes. I'm also a real estate developer. You're probably thinking, oh, great, another developer. Seeking to maybe change the scenic environment and maybe like diminish the the open space, which is the reason why I'm moving out there and why so many people reside there and love the environment. But I thought maybe this is a totally exploratory conversation. I do not ever want to impose any ideas in an uninvited fashion. I sort of deep dived into a project recently. It was and I thought this might be informative for whatever this is worth. It was in an area where there was a 20 unit density, and we went out and we bid to 4 different general contractors, came up with the cost. And because of all the construction inflation and then interest rates to add to that, the whole cost of the project at only 20 units made the project such that it was deeply underwater. I mean, and when I say that, it was probably a little over a couple $1 million where it was just upside down. And so there's an economic or, you know, a math dimension to what to do about, you know, whether land should be turned into housing or if it should just stay as land. So what I found was that anything that is sort of that 20 unit density in the region is simply not feasible. And maybe that's how it should be, you know, to maintain the open space and keep sort of that character. But that I just wanted to pass along. That's something I ran into, and I'd be happy at any point to sort of share that math, what it looked like and how I arrived at those numbers. But I ended up sort of pulling out of it because it just wasn't going to work. So for whatever that's worth, there is I've also gone and done a study, not really a study, but I've just kind of taken a look at other ski towns. And Garrett, I really appreciate that slide deck that you walked everyone through. It was very informative for me. It really brought out a number of interesting points. But I think that if there were, you know, the ability to either achieve, like on that 20 unit density site, if I could have gone up one more story and, you know, added some more units, which I would have intended them to be for the workforce, it would have penciled out. That project would work. And so, you know, that would have been actually a 3-story building, but that's sort of what that's how the math came out. That's the conclusion I came to. Did anybody here attend the Housing Colorado conference by any chance?
No.
The one that was-
Okay. There was recently a Housing Colorado conference. It was the audience was largely made up of housing authorities, planning departments, you know, affordable housing developers and groups like that. And it was basically, you know, a large 3-day symposium to develop, you know, to share ideas, exchange ideas, what some towns are doing, and sort of cross-fertilizing to come up with solutions to the sort of the housing issue that exists. And, you know, someone raised an interesting point, and this is actually Snowmass. They are approaching things from the perspective of what is our workforce housing deficit? And when I looked up the study for Grand County, it's about 700 units, give or take. That's the deficit. And so Snowmass just takes the approach of, you know, what is our objective here? Do we want to tackle 100% of those units and try to, and, you know, set ourselves on the path of trying to put in place enough units to create that balance so that the employers like the hospital system, school district, ski resorts, et cetera, have the employees they need. And in their case, they selected a percentage, and that's become sort of their mantra and their key objective. And so I thought it was an interesting perspective. And maybe all of you are already thinking of it this way, and I'm new here, so I'm just listening and learning a lot. But I thought that was interesting. And in that case, it would be at least countywide 70%, trying to hit 70% within a certain period of time would be the equivalent of, say, 540 units, I think is the math. And that wouldn't be just in Fraser, that would be distribution across the entire county. But I thought that was interesting myself. So I don't want to belabor any of these points any longer, but those are just some thoughts, food for thought, and that's about that.
I have a question for Lee. Lee, I thought you were gonna answer my question when you started out talking about when you penciled out your 20 unit per acre project and you were a couple of $1 million in the hole on it. You know, it didn't, the math didn't work. You started to say, if you could have gone up another story, it would have worked. But what would that have, my question was, well, at what density per acre would it have worked? You said, if I could have gone up another story, it would have worked. But what would that density have been?
That I'm glad you're asking that question. So that would have been 30 units. So right now it's like the building would have been 10 units, and then 10 on top of that. So 2 stories. And then if you add one more story to get to 30, then the project could pencil. And you know, that would have been underneath the height restriction there. So it would have complied on that front. But it would have been outside of the box on density.
And density.
Yeah. You know, that was an interesting exercise for me. Just given, you know, it was kind of a ski town example. And what I realized is, I think in any ski town, and it just gets harder when you go into Summit, or if you go into the Roaring Fork, or, you know, name your ski area. I think 20 units per acre is, in today's crazy world with all the cost inflation, that is an obsolete concept. It had its day pre-inflation, you know, years ago. There was a time when that would have worked, I'm sure. But in today's world, the costs are so steep that, you know, if I am shown another piece of land where I know there's demand for workforce housing, but it has a 20 unit density, I'm just going to right off the bat know that that project will not work.
Right. Thanks, Lee.
Of course.
That's a good marking point. So driven more by density than anything else. And it kind of goes back to that discussion about Granby. No density outline. It's based on meeting all the other requirements.
I like that idea.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Lee.
Of course.
Anybody else?
I was just gonna make a comment. Those, if you guys know the units, Winter Park Meadows, the ones right behind Safeway, the
Sure.
green building. They're 350, 400 square feet.
Tiny, yeah.
The last one sold for 350, 375. My brain's over there. She knows all.
Mhm.
295, so around 300,000,
Yeah.
350 square feet.
Yeah.
Those are micro units.
Yeah.
You know, they're like a,
Yeah. I've been in them. They're tiny.
right, they're a shotgun.
Yeah.
You walk, the kitchen's on both sides. You walk through the living room, there's a couch and a couch. You walk through the kitchen and the bedroom's in the back.
Yeah.
Right, it's like an RV. There we go. There's a word. It's like
$1,000.
living in an RV.
$1,000 a square
That's
foot.
the one
$1,000
thing.
a foot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one bedroom, not the studio, right?
Okay.
So the reason I brought that up, that's one of our higher density products, and what they did is a big common area in the middle. If you haven't been in the unit,
So we still got quite a bit of agenda left here.
Yep,
so,
sorry,
yeah,
we'll go,
that's okay.
we'll go.
So,
it's a very interesting subject.
yeah, it is. No. So it seems like focusing on units, like
Mhm.
Parnell's been asking for a long time. And the height, I think we're more marginal on, but it sounded like from what Lee was saying, it pencils out even at 30 feet. So 45 gives you a full 3 stories. So anyway, some thoughts.
It's just if you want a bigger footprint of a building
Yeah.
or a smaller footprint of the building.
Okay.
But if you still keep your open space and parking requirements, that's what defines the.
Yeah. And I really like the thought of charging for basically you get some parking with your unit, but if you need more parking, there's a cost to cars, and that can help drive our Victoria Village conversation too. So there's a person who lives in a unit and doesn't have a car on it, enjoy some kind of financial benefit to that. So,
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here? I mean,
well,
is there,
all
a-
this-
is there a due out that we come out of this with, that we set up for the next meeting to continue this, or what?
Well, Bob, you're a commissioner, ask for stuff.
Yeah. So I
I've been asking
absolutely,
for years.
oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so it sounds to me like maybe something that we could explore is maybe with our density bonus, just removing the unit cap entirely. If you provide affordable housing, 20% of the total units should be deed restricted affordable, but you're not even capped at 40 units per acre. You can build however many units fit on your site, subject to open space, setbacks, height limits, et cetera. It allows flexibility for the developer to provide a range of unit sizes, and it helps kind of maybe helps projects pencil out when otherwise they wouldn't. So maybe that's an option.
And set up a percentage of the number of units that has to be for workforce housing.
Yes.
May we get that as an agenda item? I really do think we'll be doing the rounds about it until we clarify.
Yeah.
And your recommendations would be very much
Sure,
appreciated.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think what we're asking is for staff to come back to us at a future meeting with
Sure.
recommendations on how to change our code.
Yeah. Yeah.
Based
Exactly.
on some of our conversations
Yeah,
today.
right,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And the reason this came to a head is this has been kicked down the road since 1979,
Yeah. Sure. Okay.
right? So we've inherited the previous generation.
So we're doing about as good as Congress then.
Well, we're doing much better. We've had a whole meeting. We had a whole meeting and we got things thought through. This is much better than Congress.
Well, we can't lose sight. Enjoy. I appreciate your input that we seem to be going back and forth on this, but staff has just passed all the way through a major zoning change.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's in a large area of town. So with one more step with the town board, that's done. And we've defined a neighborhood through all of that. So I
Yeah.
really want to commend staff. So.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
great.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next presentation of current variance criteria.
Alrighty, I'll share my screen again. Okay. So the purpose of this presentation is more to go over, especially after last month's Board of Adjustment meeting, really what are our criteria for approving a variance request, and maybe how those differ to those in Winter Park and Granby, again, our nearest municipalities. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but our code defines 7 different criteria, all of which must be satisfied to grant a variance. And this is a variance from any of the standards in our land development code, height, density, I believe even parking spaces, things like setback encroachments, and so forth. So in summary, it's, some sort of unique circumstance exists on the property. It doesn't exist throughout that broader area where the property is located. That unique circumstance was not created by the applicant. And then that circumstance prevents the property from being developed in conformity with our land development code, won't alter the character of the neighborhood or area. And then it's, doesn't harm the public good and is in the intent of our comprehensive plan. And then item 7 is kind of a special one. It's needed to provide accommodation for persons with a disability. So comparing, Winter Park only has 4 criteria. And there's a lot of overlap between these and our own, which I'll dive into, but just 4 items, and then Granby has 5. So in thinking through the areas where they overlap, both cover the, some unique physical circumstance or other condition exists that's covered from all 3. those conditions don't exist elsewhere on other parcels. That also is covered by all three. Winter Park does not have this unique condition, wasn't created by the applicant, whereas we and Granby have that stipulation. Again, the reasonably developed in conformance with the code, that's similar, but I put an asterisk there, which I'll touch on a little bit later on the next slide. The variance, if granted, would not alter the character of the neighborhood. Again, very similar between all three towns. And then the variance wouldn't be detrimental to the public or the intent of the comprehensive plan, again, covered by all three towns. So I think the area where there's kind of the biggest room for differences in interpretation comes down to this, I kind of called it the hardship criteria. If you read through the language for Winter Park and Granby, I would argue that their language could be interpreted to be maybe looser than our own. Ours says that the property cannot be reasonably developed in conformity with our code. Whereas for Winter Park and Granby, it says if the property were to be developed to the letter of the code, it would result in some kind of difficulty or unnecessary hardship. So to me, I interpret that as being a little bit looser. Again, I think it's up to interpretation, but yeah. I don't know if anyone wants to discuss that or again, just have time to read through each of those. Yeah, it certainly is. And I mean, I think that's maybe also what it boils down to is at one point, maybe these were interpreted in a more loose fashion, and then it sets a precedent, right? Kind of as we discussed a month ago. And then I did want to walk through this example from the town of Winter Park. It was a height variance request that was approved last November. This is for the parcel just south of the Randy's restaurant in Winter Park. It's a proposed hotel. And I mean, boiling down to it, the reason why the variance request was approved is because the parcel, Highway 40 is on the left side of the screen, and then the river is on the right side, and the parcel slopes down from the highway towards the river about 12 or 14 feet. But the footprint of the building covered that entire area over that sloping topography. And if you look at the side elevation here, it may be kind of hard to see, but again, Winter Park defines their height measurement in more or less the same way that we do, where even if you alter the grade of the site, it's based on kind of what the previous exposed grade was before the site was developed. And since the building footprint covered that entire area where the natural topography was sloping down, if you take the lowest point, which is like off here to the left, and then carried that line across over here and then measured to the highest point up towards the highway, you get 69 feet. But in reality, the actual like finished elevation is where the mouse is right there. So the intent is that the variance allowed this structure to still be, 55 feet roughly from, say, Highway 40 from the street, but when measured from the lowest point on the property previously, it's 69. And that's why what they actually did was grant a variance kind of in this stepwise fashion. So that way, say, they granted 69 across the board. The eastern side of the building isn't unnecessarily tall. It was kind of a transitional height variance to where different parts of the building are allowed to be different heights based on the previous topography. And again, it results in a 4 to 5 story structure in general.
Yeah, it's kind of the same argument we used with Victoria Village. It drops so down from the highway that we gave it the height variance was easier to give it to it.
Right.
But it may be better for it to be sloped where the height by the highway is 55, and then by the river trail,
So,
it's
Garrett, did you-
45.
Did you get a sense, looking at these other towns that the variance committee was normally presented with a vacant parcel or with a building plan?
Do you mean like a previous, like an undeveloped parcel that was?
Well, we were presented with our various requests with vacant land.
Mhm.
It looks like the town of Winter Park here was presented with a building.
Well, this was also vacant land, but I would say,
No, but I mean, but they had a building plan. This is,
Yes.
this is what the developer wanted to do. And which makes this a little bit easier and then you can see what you've got in front of you. So that's what I'm driving at. So.
yes, I think in general, looking at some of the other variance requests and applications, there's just certainly more information. I mean, something like this kind of side profile elevation would have been helpful to have.
Yeah.
A month ago with that variance request, but it's not something that is required.
Right.
And then I guess diving into that, these are the submittal requirements for our variance applications for the town of Fraser. I think in comparing these to Winter Park, the two on the top, electronic site plan, electronic site survey, we do not require those just across the board. And then same for Granby site plan drawing. I think even going beyond this, a site plan is typically, a bird's eye view of a layout, but for a height variance request, I think the key thing is having a side profile elevation of any proposed structures.
The Granby language there said that they need the structure.
At least some view of it.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. And I mean, I will add that our submittal requirements do have some leeway where we can request any other reports, information, items that the town deems necessary. But I think in general, it's probably best to just require some of that up front
Yeah.
and kind of as across the board rule. So
Building. What they're gonna do
conceptual
with the
building
property, what
plans,
they're gonna
yeah.
do with the property. So,
Site plan. like-
Yeah, and I would say,
I agree, because that was the big issue that I had with it. It's like,
Right.
we're gonna approve this, but we have no idea what could go.
well, the discussion the whole evening was a what if discussion and that can go on it could have gone on all night.
so are we going to say that what we'd like to see is a site plan with the building located on the site plan and an elevation view so that you can see the height
Yes.
of the building?
At least a
Yeah.
conceptual plan. We don't want to,
Yeah,
you
I
don't
mean,
want
I'm
to
not
drive a
saying
person to have
finished
to draw
drawing, but
a tremendous amount of.
we ought to
work.
see two things. We ought to see the site plan where it sits on the site. And we ought to see what it's gonna look like in at least one elevation view.
So on this one, that makes sense because you're seeing it go from 69 feet down to 57 feet. So you can see it change. If it's just a single building that's 55 feet tall, I stand this building up right here. That's 55 feet tall. It means nothing to you because you have nothing to compare it to. It's just in the middle of a field. Right? So seeing having an idea of what 55 feet would be out in that area, we'll take Clark's variance, right? If we looked at Clark's variance and said, here's where 55 feet is, what does that really look like? The only way you can compare it to is the tree line that sits out there and see where's 55 feet on that tree line, right? Take a power pole, they're 45 feet, 35 feet to 45 feet tall, right? So you could see what a power pole is. What Clark gave us was the plats of where the buildings would be versus how big they would have to be if they went 45 feet. But yes, I agree, having some kind of visual so you have an idea of what does the 55 foot look like compared to 45.
Right.
And I apologize, I forgot to tell the staff to pull up some pictures when we had that going on. Because I did that, I went out and took pictures of the buildings that were there in the power poles, so we'd have an idea of what 45 feet and 55 feet looked at in that area. But I wasn't on the,
And with the site plan, you gotta see what the topography's doing too.
yes,
Right.
So some sort of a rendering of an elevation view so you can see what the 55 feet looks like in communion with the rest of the neighborhood.
Yeah, 'cause a lot of the language talks about the neighborhood. so,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how it's gonna sit and the grades that it's gonna be, working with, because,
Right.
like with Victoria Village, we went to 55 feet there. That was a pretty easy decision to do based on how the site sloped and how it was gonna look when you put it in there. So, yeah,
We didn't get a visual of the building. We just got, there was a deficit between the road and the
Right.
back of the property. Nobody showed us the building height. And
no,
I'm
we
just saying
didn't,
that,
but we knew that there was gonna be a cut up near 40,
right, and,
about 10 feet. So that was kind of how we went from 45 to 55.
right, and, looking at Coastlake's building from my house, which is, I think we're at 30 feet to the point of it. But when you're standing on our deck, it wouldn't matter if that building was 35 feet or 45 feet. We lost the majority of the view anyways. At 55 feet, it made no difference. what
Right.
view we lost.
That's,
And that's,
Okay.
that's a good distance from us.
So in this day and age too, how tough is it for someone to take a photo and then have that overlay somehow tie it in with the measurements to throw it on so you could see what it does
Sure.
with
Yeah.
the view of buyers?
Or into the neighborhood too, so, yeah.
It's not extremely difficult. I mean, in Google Earth, you can do it and it's not exact, but it's a good approximation and you can do that in like 10 minutes,
So
but
that would be
yeah.
really useful.
right.
Well, the other thing
I think that would be a really useful mandate for us to have as part of that.
the other thing that the cell tower industry's done for ages is when they come in to ask for a tower on a site, usually they come in with a graphic. They put a balloon up to the height of the tower.
Yep.
And then they take the picture so you can see with the balloon how tall the tower is going to be in the surrounding area.
Remember when we built the broom hut, we had to show the Forest Service a flag line at that height.
Yeah.
So it took a lot to haul that big piece of PVC up the mountainside.
That's a good point.
But anyway, some kind of visual representation would certainly help.
Right.
Right.
It doesn't have to be the whole building design. It's just,
No.
here's 55 feet, here's 45.
Well, aren't we, I wanted to have some input on this variance because I practice land use law all over the country, and these variance requirements that we have in Fraser are not that different than others all over the country. The only one that I see that's different is number 7, which is the disability, which I haven't ever seen that in a variance criteria before. But it's not, the burden is on the applicant to provide all the evidence to meet this criteria. A variance shouldn't be given routinely. It only should apply when there really is some unique physical characteristic of the piece of property that they're trying to develop that creates a hardship that the person who bought that piece of property, knowing what it looked like, did not create. In other words, in my opinion, the variance is not the way to go if we're trying to alter heights or do something that the code should be providing. A variance is something that should not be easily granted because it is hard to meet these criteria, but there's a reason for having the criteria in the first place. And that's probably why we haven't granted one for a few years. They're not designed to be easily granted. And that's just my feeling. I don't know what we're trying to do here in terms of what we're trying to change here with our variance process, make it more lenient so people can get them easier, or what is our objective here with reviewing our variance criteria?
I think more so this presentation was just geared on, again, education and information, and not recommending any changes to these criteria. I mean, the Board of Adjustment hadn't met for 5 years, and I think a lot of the members here were maybe a little bit caught off guard or just had to be re-educated on these criteria as that variance request came in. So I think it's just, again, even though it would have been better to maybe have this before that meeting last month, but just kind of look at what our criteria are and show that really they're not that different than Winter Park or Granby. And I appreciate your comment that even more broadly across the state and country, they're probably pretty similar to these.
They are very similar.
Yeah,
And the only thing I'd add, Margaret, is this is asking for variance is the only thing the public can do other than follow the code the way it is. There's no other avenue for somebody to come in and say, hey, I have a better idea. Instead of building a strip mall 100 feet long with residential housing on top of it at 45 feet, I could, and that's what Clark was trying to get across, is he could make the footprints of the building smaller, leaving more open space and more view corridors if he could go to 55 feet. Him not being here didn't help, but because his only option was to go through the variance, he didn't meet any of the criteria, because that's not what, he wasn't saying it was a problem. He was saying, I'm trying to make a better development. And that's why he wanted a 55-foot variance. But
Yeah,
that's-
I totally agree. And that one, but the problem was the variance mechanism. I know it's the only way he could do it, but it's not really what the variance is used for generally. I mean, to change the code requirements, he needs to change the code and not use the variance process
And
on
that's,
ad hoc basis. That's kind of that's what I was trying to get at.
that's what we just spent the last, excuse me, 45 minutes doing.
Yeah.
So everybody does have that opportunity, Parnell. It is long and lengthy, but the Riverwalk District, how many, I mean, we've only been at this 2 months
But the
to
Riverwalk,
change that zone to make that fit better into, I don't know, Parnell,
No.
there is
Yeah.
there's a way that I hope that our regulatory process and changing our regulatory process will always be very approachable.
what I'm saying is it limits developers and architects to not being as creative.
Well, but
Because-
let's change the process.
Right, that's what I'm saying. We need
Yeah.
a different process. Somebody comes in with a better way to develop,
Right.
we should be able to look at it.
So that Lee's input tonight was very well taken.
Yeah, and
And that goes back to the unit discussion. I mean, we're kind of going backwards, but I hope that we impressed on everybody last week, and that's why we're doing this tonight. That we can change our code, we can make it work better.
and that Riverwalk took about 3 years. From the time we started the overlay till today.
The, o-
We've been
Well-
talking about the overlay since 2020, we're in 2023.
well, the overlay sat there as is for a long period of time.
That's what I mean, but that's. It sat there, people said they wanted to do stuff with it, they couldn't meet the criteria, now we gotta do new.
Yeah. But Michael, when did you start that?
when did I start? 2017.
So 2017, so
So,
no, but we started the effort to narrow down the zoning, to change the zoning, to make this work better for the people that wanted to develop down there, not how many months ago?
for the Riverwalk District?
Yes,
That was when the application came in for the single family home to build the, I
right.
believe the ADU above a garage,
And that was how long ago?
3-4 months ago.
Yeah, so 4 months.
Well, but that's because we started 2017.
But we turned it around in 4 months,
Yeah.
Parnell, is what I'm saying.
I'm not saying it can't be done.
Yeah. Can be done.
It
So,
takes us 18
anyway.
months to get a plat
Yeah,
done. so-
okay.
So I think what I'm hearing is, so going back to our previous discussion, I think everyone was generally in favor of having some option to go beyond 40 unit per acre density. But the general tenor of the conversation was not favorable towards increasing our maximum height in general. So,
Maybe in certain areas.
but in certain areas, well, the variance is that process, but it is pretty limited and narrow in our interpretation.
Would you go back to Granby, slide 1?
Yes. This. But if, again, so the only mechanism that is available for someone who believes that their development would be better suited by 55 feet or whatever height as opposed to 45. The only mechanism that they have is the variance process, but it sounds like maybe we need some alternate process. Again, like the density bonus, we could have a height bonus
But if you
Not-
don't think it's restriction on density,
Mhm.
make no density comments. We say, you don't have, we'll allow whatever density you want. Within the parameters of your parking and open space.
Mhm. Well, we would tie that to something like the provision of deed restricted of,
Yeah.
you know, housing, right? So I'm saying similar, I don't have a great idea of what that condition could be through which we would approve a greater height, but maybe, you know, a more open space, 50% open space, because you know, for whatever reason, they want to provide more open space in a taller building. I mean, that's just something, you know,
Right.
like, yeah, a trade-off, right? So,
Because that was one thing that, was a flag for me on the request from our last meeting was, there was nothing that said that they couldn't still make their footprint the same size and go up that extra distance and just make bigger election units.
right,
Nothing that restricted that, so I like
Right.
that idea.
Yeah.
And preferably not right on Highway. I don't think that we should allow 50 feet right on Highway 40 unless
but-
it's below grade.
It doesn't make, 55 feet and 35 feet on US 40 doesn't make a difference when you're in your car. Just go get in your car, go really slow, drive past Fishers and look over and see if you can see buyers when you're on the highway. You cannot see it, and Fishers is not 35 feet tall. The building behind it, the Fishers isn't 45 feet. Yeah, or no, they're not, I think they're under 45. But drive by and look at that. At 45 feet, you can't see it. You can't see buyers. It's gone. At 25 feet, buyers is gone from the highway.
You know, behind, along with that, I'm thinking more of that, again, that visual, that idea that people don't come here to be in the city.
Right,
Okay.
so get out of town. Go walk on a trail and get
Okay,
out of.
we're guys, we're back to where we were an hour ago. So, yeah, yeah. 2 hours ago, sorry.
Yeah, but when you're driving through the town, that's the town. So before you get to town, it's wide open. When you leave town, it's wide open.
Yeah, okay. So, any more on the variance?
Well, I would like to see, I mean, I like what Margaret said, but I'd like to see another mechanism for people to be able to come in with better ideas and not for us to have to say, well, now we got to go change the whole code, take an additional 4 months or 5 years to get it done.
I think maybe the best path forward is I can explore if other communities have some sort of height bonus provision in their code. I'm not as familiar with it as density bonuses, but again, I can do some research and see if other municipalities have that type of mechanism in their code and what,
Out there.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if you're the first, you're always number one.
I actually personally like the look of that, along the highway, like look at Basalt and your Durango and those are cool. That's a cool downtown. I
Yep.
always envisioned Fraser growing up and being that at some stage.
Yep.
So,
In the design, the architectural design is the
you could,
biggest
we
thing.
could, we could.
Do we have that yet? the
Architectural design is how you make it look appealing.
Mhm.
Can we have that next?
By forcing, rather than just doing the steel building that has no character to it, you could force.
Which is a good
the
segue,
designer, yeah.
which is a good segue to that.
That's right.
So the segue, so if we're, so I just one last thing on variance. I think if we had some sort of clear guidance that we'd like to consider building plans.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
we can
yes.
see what we're talking about. So set that segue into architectural design guidelines, D. And this one's, you've got a lot of slides. I think we've been through them, but I don't know, this might be another agenda item.
Yeah,
Please.
So back in the day, originally, we did have architectural, and it was supposed to have that western storefront. You know, the black.
Ever in the town code, Katie, or?
Yeah,
think-
I think
we
it was.
forced Ace Hardware to do that.
Yeah.
That metal and rock on the bottom of their.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Their building.
Yeah.
I don't know.
All that.
Yeah, I thought we used to have an architectural guidelines.
Yeah, we did, and then, at one point, people coming with different changes, and Jeff said, oh, let's just do Funky Fraser. And let
Oh,
them
that's
know what
right.
they
Yeah,
want
that is right. We did do
to
that.
do the things. So,
So maybe in the next, when we do this as an agenda item, we have a little history of what we've done.
yeah.
Yeah.
And granted, you know,
I mean-
like Costco, it's unique.
Mhm.
Not a fit into our architecture.
Not the original one.
So if we are gonna make parameters, it's like, it. I don't
It's a-
know,
this is a tough-
people Not doing that, and the old west is still gonna hold on. to
Well,
it.
So
There we go,
Katie, how long have you been here?
47 years.
Okay, so in the 47 years you've been here, what did you want Fraser to grow up and look like?
I never thought about it. Just the day to day.
Yeah,
But I always wanted to be able to see the open space, and I bought a piece of property that holds our view by our feet somewhere else.
Yep.
And a lot of people just treasure that, and it's iconic.
no, right.
So, for the town and everything else, but I understand. what
But
you're
you,
saying.
you live in the burbs though. We're living downtown. So.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, it's like the birds, the whole
you know, we said this before,
town,
but
the hip side of the tracks.
Fraser started because it was railroad and ranches. Right, so what do we want to look like?
Yeah.
What do we want to be when we grow up?
Well, let's.
I mean, I haven't grown up yet. I'm still 21 years old, so I don't know what the rest of you are doing. Yeah, right.
So is this worthy of a full session, do you think, guys?
Yeah, for sure,
Okay,
for sure.
okay.
More discussion next time.
If we're gonna keep doing funky Fraser, we gotta come up with what funky is.
What funky is, let's define the
Well,
funk.
but funky is not.
Yes, or what funky is not. That's good. And that's a good way to start. That's a good way to start,
You know,
actually.
funky is not
Your gym.
a box.
What don't you want?
Yeah.
You do not want a rectangle. A variance.
Yeah.
Which was one of our previous. You do not
Right.
want it.
Well, we've got two of them over by the library. That's, that's affordable. That's
Yeah.
modular, so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, they're tucked away in the neighborhood.
They're tucked away
Not
for
a
you.
rectangle.
They're
right.
tucked away for you, but not for the other neighbor.
So do we have architectural control guidelines that are different in different parts of town would be another question.
Right.
I would think
So,
so, for the
yeah.
Riverwalk district.
Yeah.
definitely,
It would help with the NIMBY.
Because that includes all of Highway 40.
Yeah.
And that's all,
Yeah.
I mean, the rest of it.
So
The downtown quarter to me has always been the river to the railroad.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
That's
that's,
pretty much how we zoned it, so.
right, that's
yeah.
how it's always been to me,
Yeah.
is that's to me where we should have our development, so people that drive through and just drive through, well, they don't get to see the beauty of our town. You have to stop and go into the backyard.
All right,
So basically, we're talking about having some idea of what our architectural, views are from the railroad to the river. And that's basically where we have business district now or Riverwalk.
There's a
Correct.
great variance option. If you can give us better views of what we want, we'll give you better variance. I don't know how we put that into a criteria, but he's a smart young man. He'll figure it out.
Well, and the creatively artistic can go in line with the funky.
Right.
Perhaps that's how we can partly define it.
okay, well, let's hold that for
And
another.
again, it was just thrown out there because it rhymed. It was thrown out there because it rhymed.
What,
Is
the
it-
funky?
They
The
didn't want it at that
alliteration?
point,
The
it was just
funky?
Over making people toe the line on what they wanted to build, he's like, let's make it fun. Do what they want.
Andy, can I make a quick comment?
Sure,
Just one term that's used a lot with the board since I've been here is this concept of smart growth. And something I would just speak to just for thoughts. And I think for the planning commission, I think it's like all the more reason for the planning commission members to walk the strip, walk around downtown, look at the buildings, look at Coslig, look at, okay, if that went up 10 feet, what would this look like? Look at the buildings that are downtown along our strip. And I think when you're talking about things like height, and maybe this is true or not true, but if you're looking at, the distillery, it's likely not going to go vertical. If you're looking at some buildings that maybe could be scrubbed, that be completely redeveloped and go to that 45 or higher, that's a thought process too. But smart growth, I think when you have that uniformity of your downtown and you have we currently have several single-story buildings in our downtown.
Mhm.
And going to a higher height limit, where you're going to have those one-story buildings, then maybe up to 4-story buildings. Just something to think about and consider as you're walking around downtown is, things inevitably go up. Towns and cities, as they grow, eventually they go up in their height. And I think, Fraser will get there at some point. I think it's just at what pace you want to consider, changes like height variances and things like that for our zoning overlays.
I think what happens is, as you make changes and to your building codes and you allow higher and taller structures, then the economics will decide how many one-story buildings you're gonna have left.
Right.
Because a smart developer who figures out he can build to 55 feet and create something really unique and different in the downtown, he's gonna buy that one-story building, demolish it and build.
Well,
But the longer we keep, kind of a lid on everything,
Mhm.
the longer it's gonna take before the town grows up, as you said, and becomes more vertical. And by the way, I don't have a problem with taller buildings through the heart of downtown, as long as there's some variance in the architectural
Mhm.
design. You don't want, like barrack buildings, 4 stories high down the town, because then it looks like a canyon.
Mhm.
Right.
What you want is you want some creative architectural designs and some height that gives you that look like you were talking about in Durango and other places.
and the problem with up here, we can't go down. Unless we're gonna
Yeah.
allow us to build submarines, right? Because the water table's.
Well, between that and the boulders,
Right.
Okay,
I
Right.
can't
So-
hardly plant a tree in my yard for all the boulders.
all right.
This is a
So-
river based.
Yeah.
The river meandered all
Yeah.
through here. Everywhere you dig there, you're gonna fall.
Yeah. Cobble. Yeah. Okay, well, let's hold this. This is an important discussion. Let's take the time we need when we're fresh. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so any other business tonight?
So we're gonna hold off on the last.
Yeah, we
discussion.
will bring that back to another meeting.
No, that's good.
I want to thank Garrett because it's
Yeah.
so nice to have a planner and somebody.
Yeah.
That's actually what I was
Oh, yeah.
just
you.
going to say.
Thank you. And
Having a town planner is refreshing.
Well
Thank
spoken,
you.
Well spoken.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I said this at the point,
yeah,
We appreciate you.
well, thank you.
great fire.
Good. This is what planning commission needs to be doing. So I'm glad to be here and glad to be working with you all. So,
We'll keep you busy.
yeah.
Any other business? The future agenda items, of course, we'll have this discussion of the design review, architectural design back,
Mhm.
And we're gonna start having more regular meetings and
Yes.
planning.
at least once a month. Yep.
And we still haven't
Thanks, Ian.
addressed the unit.
Well, but I think the unit
Well-
issue, it seemed like Granby's model.
Yeah.
Satisfying the requirements
Yeah.
might be an easy way to do this.
Mhm.
Maybe look more at Granby and see if that's provided challenges for
You
that.
know, get enough people paying for parking, we could get a parking garage somewhere in town.
That's right.
Well, I moved to adjourn.
We have a second,
Second.
all in favor?
Hi.
Aye, thanks.
So.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The unit-
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Garrett. Good job.